The first thing I remember clearly after they put her on my chest is my mother's voice, low enough that she probably thought no one but her would hear it. "Well, she's a mistake we'll have to make the best of." I was 31 years old, lying in a hospital bed with stitches still warm beneath the gauze, holding 7 pounds of new daughter, and that sentence dropped into the room like a stone into still water. I didn't say anything. I don't think I even fully understood, in that moment, that I'd heard it right. "My name is Hannah. I teach 3rd grade at a public school in Phoenix, the kind of job where you learn to read a room of 8-year-olds in about 4 seconds, who's about to cry, who's about to lie, who needs you to look away so they can compose themselves. I am good at reading rooms. I have always been good at reading my mother's rooms, especially the small shifts in her face that tell you which version of her you're about to get. That day, in the recovery room, I read her face and I told myself I'd misheard. Mara was sitting in the chair by the window. Mara, my closest friend since college, a labor and delivery nurse herself, which is the only reason she'd been allowed to hover in my room past visiting hours. I saw her go very still. Not shocked still. The stillness of someone deciding, in real time, whether to say something. She didn't. My husband, Tom, was in the hallway getting coffee from the machine that never had enough cups. He came back 40 seconds later with 2 paper cups and no idea that anything had happened at all, and by then my mother had already smoothed her face back into the soft, doting expression she'd worn since she walked in, the one she'd practiced, I think. The way she practiced most things that needed to look effortless. "She's beautiful, Hannah," my mother said, louder this time, for the room. "Just beautiful." I held my daughter and I said thank you, because that is what I do. That is what I have always done with my mother: absorb the blow privately, perform normalcy publicly, and tell myself later that I must have misread it, because the alternative was a kind of grief I didn't have room for, not on the day my daughter was born. I named her Lily. It means, depending on which meaning you choose to believe, purity or rebirth, or, in some old traditions, a kind of fierce, unexpected beauty that grows where you don't plan for it. I think I chose it because I wanted to give her a name with no room left in it for mistake. For 3 months, I didn't see my mother. That wasn't a decision, exactly, not the kind you make in one clean motion. It was more like a held breath that kept extending itself, day by day, because every time I considered calling her, my chest did something tight and unpleasant, and I'd put the phone down and tell myself tomorrow. Tom never asked me to explain it. He'd pieced together enough from my silence after she left the hospital, from the way I changed the subject whenever his own mother asked when Grandma Diane was coming to visit, to understand that something had happened in that room, even though I never told him the exact words. I think some part of me believed that saying them out loud would make them more true than they already were. Mara called every week, the way she always had, and every week I almost told her I knew she'd heard it too. I never did. There's a particular kind of cowardice in not asking a friend to confirm the worst thing you suspect, because as long as you don't ask, you can still believe you might be wrong. My mother texted twice in those 3 months. Both times, the same tone, breezy, certain, as if no time had passed and nothing needed repairing because nothing had broken. "Thinking of you both. Let me know when I can come meet my granddaughter properly, love." I left both messages on read. Then, on a Tuesday in early June, with Lily 3 months old and finally sleeping in 4-hour stretches, with the bassinet's blanket, the soft yellow one my mother had given us at the hospital, before any of this, still folded at the foot of it, there was a knock at my door. I knew, before I even reached the handle, exactly who it was. I opened it, and there she stood on my porch in the Phoenix heat, holding a gift bag with tissue paper poking out the top, smiling the smile she'd worn in the recovery room. I was in the neighborhood, my mother said. I thought, maybe I could finally hold her. Maybe I could watch her for you sometime, give you and Tom a night out. I've been thinking about it so much. I stood in my own doorway, my daughter's monitor crackling faintly from somewhere behind me, and I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in 3 months click fully into place. She wanted to babysit the mistake. I let her in. Of course I let her in. I told myself it was because turning my own mother away on the porch, in front of a neighbor watering his lawn across the street, would have been its own kind of scene, But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. Some old, well-worn part of me still wanted to be the daughter who didn't make things difficult. She held Lily for 20 minutes, cooing in the voice she used to use on me when I was small and sick, and I stood in my own kitchen wiping down a counter that didn't need wiping, watching my mother's face soften into something that looked, from a distance, exactly like love. She has your eyes, Diane said. Thank God she doesn't have your father's temper. I didn't respond to that either. I had gotten good, over the years, at letting comments like that pass through the room without catching on anything, the way you'd let a draft move through a house with all the doors open. After she left, Tom found me sitting on the edge of the bathtub, not crying exactly, just very still. You okay? Fine, I said. She has a way of saying things. What things? I almost told him then. The words were right there, 3 months overdue. But Lily started fussing on the monitor, and the moment passed the way most of my moments with my mother had always passed, postponed in favor of something more urgent, more solvable. Over the following weeks, my mother became a regular fixture again, the way water finds its way back into a crack you thought you'd sealed. She came on Sundays. She brought small gifts, a stuffed rabbit, a onesie with a strawberry on it, each one accompanied by a comment that landed somewhere between affectionate and surgical. You're feeding her that much? I never let you get chubby. Are you sure she's hitting her milestones? Your cousin's baby was crawling by now. Small things. The kind of things I could explain away individually. That's just how she talks. That's just her generation. She doesn't mean it the way it sounds. I had a lifetime of practice turning my mother's words into something more digestible, and I did it now almost without noticing I was doing it. What I did notice, though I didn't let myself look directly at it yet, was the way Diane never once mentioned the hospital. Not the delivery, not the recovery room, not the day Lily was born. She skipped over it entirely in conversation, the way you'd step over a crack in a sidewalk without acknowledging you'd seen it. I told myself that was normal. People forget the exact things they say in emotional moments. People say things under stress that they don't mean. I told myself a lot of things that summer. Mara noticed something was off long before I said anything to her. We were at her apartment, Lily asleep in the portable bassinet, the two of us on her couch with wine I wasn't quite ready to drink yet. You're doing the thing, Mara said. What thing? The thing where you go quiet and pretend you're not thinking about your mom. I picked at a loose thread on the couch cushion. She's been around more. Helping out. That's not what I asked. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a second I thought, she's going to bring it up. She's going to say it first, and then I won't have to. She didn't. It's good she's around, Mara said instead, looking down at her glass. For Lily, I mean. Kids need grandparents. It was such a careful sentence. I realized, sitting there, that Mara had constructed it the way you'd construct a sentence around a hole in the floor, walking the long way to avoid stepping through it. I didn't push her. I told myself I would, eventually. Later. When I was ready to hear whatever she'd say back. That night, after Mara dropped us home, I stood over Lily's crib for a long time, watching her sleep, her small fists curled up near her face. I thought about my mother's hands on her that afternoon, gentle, practiced, the same hands that had once smoothed my hair back when I was sick and also, on a different kind of day, had a way of finding the exact soft place in me and pressing. Something shifted in me that summer, though I couldn't have named it then. I only knew that every Sunday my mother left, I felt something in my chest unclench by degrees I hadn't realized had been clenched. I didn't understand yet that relief, after a visit with someone you love, is its own kind of information. It was Tom who said it first, plainly, the way only someone outside the immediate blast radius of a family can say a thing. Has your mom ever apologized for anything? Like, in your whole life? We were folding laundry, Lily propped in the bouncer between us, and the question landed with more weight than the moment seemed to call for. I kept folding. She's not really an apologizing person. That's not what I asked. I thought about it, really thought about it, turning the question over the way you'd turn over a stone to see what's living underneath. I couldn't think of one. Not one clean, unqualified apology in 31 years. There had been explanations. Justifications. The occasional "I'm sorry you feel that way," which I had spent my whole life mistaking for the real thing. I didn't ask Tom why he wanted to know. Some part of me was afraid that if I asked, he'd tell me something I wasn't ready to hold yet. Diane brought an old photo album on her next visit, unprompted, settling onto my couch with Lily on her lap and the album open across both their bodies like she was building a bridge between 3 generations. "Look, that's your brother at 6 months. Look how he's smiling at the camera." I looked. Daniel, gap-toothed even as a baby somehow, caught mid-laugh, my mother's arms around him in a photo so warm it looked staged, though I knew it wasn't. I recognized our old kitchen in the background. The yellow wallpaper we'd had before I was old enough to remember it being there. I flipped back a few pages and found one of myself at a similar age. I wasn't smiling. My mother wasn't looking at the camera in that one. She was looking just past it, at something or someone off to the side, her arms around me, but her attention somewhere else entirely. "You were a fussier baby," Diane said, following my eyes to the photo. "Daniel was easy. You were work." She said it lightly. She said most things lightly. I was beginning to understand, part of how she did it, wrapping the blade in enough softness that you'd cut yourself before you noticed it was sharp. I caught myself doing the math I'd done 1,000 times before without naming it as math. If Daniel was easy and I was work, then whatever I'd felt missing all those years wasn't actually missing. It was earned. I had simply been the kind of child who required more and required, in my mother's vocabulary, had always been close to the word burden. I didn't say any of that out loud. I closed the album gently and asked if anyone wanted coffee. That night, after Diane left, I texted Mara something I'd never quite let myself type before. "Did my mom say something to you in the hospital? Right after Lily was born?" The 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. It took her almost 4 minutes to respond, which from Mara, who texted in the rhythm of someone constantly multitasking, felt like an eternity. Why do you ask? Not a denial. Not a confirmation. A question handed back to me, the careful, professional non-answer of someone who has spent a career delivering difficult information gently, in small doses, only when the patient is ready. Because I heard her say something. I've heard it every day for 3 months. I just need to know I'm not crazy. This time the response came faster. "You're not crazy. Can we talk in person?" I sat with my phone in my lap for a long time after that, Lily's monitor glowing faintly on the nightstand, and felt something that had been loosely tied together for months finally come undone. That was the first time I let myself fully believe it had actually happened, not a misunderstanding, not a tired new mother's overreaction, but a true thing, witnessed by someone other than me. I had spent 3 months protecting my mother from my own certainty. I hadn't realized, until that exact moment, how much weight that protection had cost me. We met 2 days later at Mara's apartment, Lily asleep against my chest in the carrier, and Mara told me, carefully, in the voice she probably used with families in the worst rooms of the hospital, that yes, she'd heard it. Word for word. A mistake we'll have to make the best of. She'd heard it, and she'd frozen, and by the time she'd thought of something to say, the moment had already closed over itself, and Diane had already rearranged her face into the version she wanted the room to remember. "I should have said something then," Mara said. "I've felt sick about it for 3 months. Why didn't you?" "Because it wasn't my place. Because I didn't know if you'd heard it, and I didn't want to be the one who put it in the room if you hadn't." She looked at me, eyes wet. "And because some small, awful part of me hoped that if nobody said it out loud, maybe it would just stop mattering." I understood that hope. I had been living inside it for 3 months myself. Looking back now, that was the moment the shape of the whole summer changed for me, not the comment itself, but the confirmation of it. A wound you're not sure is real is something you can still negotiate with. A wound that's been witnessed by someone else has a different kind of weight. It becomes a fact instead of a feeling, and facts don't soften just because you've grown tired of carrying them. I held Lily a little tighter on the walk home, and for the first time all summer, I let myself feel something other than confusion. I let myself feel angry. I didn't set out to build a case against my mother. That's not how I would have described it, not at first. I told myself I was just trying to understand, trying to see the pattern clearly enough to know whether it was a pattern at all, or whether I'd spent 3 months building a narrative out of one bad sentence and a lifetime of old hurt. So I started writing things down. Nothing dramatic, just a notes app on my phone, dated entries, short and factual, the way I'd been trained to document things at school when a parent needed to see specifics instead of feelings. June 14th, you're sure she's eating enough? I never let you get that heavy. Said in front of Tom. June 22nd, skipped over hospital story again when Tom asked, how was it when you first held her? Redirected to, Hannah handled it well, considering. June 29th, Daniel never gave me trouble like you did. Unprompted, while holding Lily. I read it back one night, all the entries lined up together, and felt something cold settle into my stomach. Spread across months in conversation, each comment was forgettable. Stacked together on a single screen, they made a shape I recognized and didn't want to. I realized, looking at that list, that I hadn't been collecting evidence of cruelty. I'd been collecting evidence that the warmth I remembered from my childhood had always come with conditions attached, conditions I'd been too young and later too loyal to notice. I finally told Tom everything: the hospital, the exact words, Mara's confirmation, the months of silence I'd let pile up instead of saying anything. He sat very still while I talked, and when I finished, he didn't say I told you so, though he could have. He just reached over and took my hand. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because saying it made it real. And because some part of me kept hoping I'd find an explanation that made it not what it sounded like. Did you find one? I hadn't. That was the truth I'd been circling for months without landing on directly. A few days later, something happened that should have clarified things and instead, for a short while, muddied them. Tom's mother had set up a shared family photo cloud years ago, extended family, all sides, a sprawling digital scrapbook nobody really maintained anymore. Scrolling through it one night, looking for an old picture of myself as a baby to compare against Lily, I found a voicemail transcript Daniel had apparently saved and uploaded years ago, a recording of our mother from his college graduation. I am so unbelievably proud of you. You have always been the easiest part of my whole life. I sat with that for a long time. The easiest part of my whole life. Not just easy, the easiest part, as if I were being measured against him in real time, decades after the fact, in a message that wasn't even meant for me. For a moment, I let myself spiral somewhere unhelpful. Maybe this was just who my mother was with Daniel, a different, softer woman, and the version I'd gotten was simply mine to bear, evidence not of cruelty, but of some failure specific to me. That was the kind of thought that used to keep me quiet for years at a time, turning my mother's behavior into a referendum on my own worth instead of a reflection of hers. I almost let it pull me back into silence. I almost deleted the notes app entries and told myself I'd been unfair. Instead, I called Daniel. He picked up on the third ring, surprised to hear from me. We weren't close, hadn't been in years. The geographic and emotional distance between Denver and Phoenix doing exactly what it does to siblings who never had much keeping them together besides shared parents. I asked him carefully what it had actually been like. Growing up. With her. There was a long pause. Why are you asking me this now? I need to know if it was different for you. Another pause, longer. It wasn't easier, Hannah. It was just different pressure. She needed me to be successful. She needed you to be agreeable. We both spent our whole childhoods performing whatever she needed, just different performances. It wasn't the answer I expected. It also, somehow, made more sense than anything else I'd learned that summer. That was the second thing that shifted for me that week, understanding that I hadn't lost some competition to my brother for our mother's love. We'd both been given different roles in the same play, and neither of us had ever actually been seen for who we were underneath them. I didn't confront her that week. I wasn't ready, and some clear-eyed part of me knew that confronting her unprepared would only hand her the upper hand she was so practiced at finding. So I waited. I gathered. I let the notes app fill up with dates and quotes, let Tom hold the parts of this I couldn't hold alone, let Mara sit with me on weekends without either of us needing to explain why I'd gone quiet again. And every Sunday, my mother kept coming over, holding her granddaughter, smiling the smile that had once, a long time ago, been the only kind of love I knew how to recognize. I let her keep coming. I needed her to. I needed one more time to watch exactly how she did it. She came on a Sunday, the way she always did, carrying a small bag of board books she'd bought for Lily, smelling like the same perfume she'd worn my entire childhood. "There's my girl," she said, reaching for Lily before she'd even fully crossed the threshold. "Mom, sit down. I need to talk to you." Something in my voice must have registered, because she paused, just slightly, before lowering herself onto the couch, Lily still in her arms. Tom stood near the kitchen doorway, close enough to be present, far enough to let this be mine. "I heard what you said in the hospital," I said. "The day Lily was born. I heard you call her a mistake." For a moment, my mother's face didn't move at all. Then she laughed, a short, dismissive sound, the kind she'd used my whole life to make me doubt what I'd just watched her do. "That's not what I said." "It is. Word for word." And Mara heard it too. Mara. My mother's mouth tightened around the name. Mara's always had her own ideas about this family. "This isn't about Mara, isn't it? You've been distant for months, Hannah, and now suddenly you're bringing up something I said in a hospital room, exhausted, after watching my daughter go through 12 hours of labor, and you want to make me the villain of your story." I felt the old reflex rise in me, the urge to soften, to apologize for bringing it up, to find the version of this conversation where I was somehow asking too much. I felt it, and for the first time in my life, I watched it happen instead of obeying it. "I'm not making you anything. I'm telling you what you said." "You've always done this," she said, shifting Lily slightly higher on her shoulder, a gesture I suddenly understood as strategic rather than tender, making herself harder to be angry at while holding my daughter. "Taken one moment and built a whole narrative around it. You did it as a teenager. You're doing it now. This isn't one moment. I have months of this written down. Things you've said about how I was harder than Daniel. How he was easy and I was work. The way you never once mentioned Lily's actual birth, because you can't bring it up without remembering what you said." Something flickered across her face, not guilt, not yet. "Calculation. I raised 2 children alone for 3 years after your father left, Hannah. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? You want to stand here and audit every word I've ever said under pressure? Where was your gratitude for everything else? For every birthday, every school play, every..." "I'm not asking you to account for everything. I'm asking you to account for that. And if I don't remember saying it exactly the way you remember hearing it, does that make me a monster? Or does it make you someone who's decided to be angry at me regardless of what actually happened?" I felt the heat rise in my chest, fast and unfamiliar, not my usual quiet retreat, not the careful absorption I'd practiced my whole life. "Something else. Give me my daughter," I said. My mother blinked. "Hannah, give her to me." She did, slowly, something uncertain crossing her face for the first time since she'd walked in. I took Lily against my chest and felt my own pulse settle slightly with the weight of her. "You don't get to hold her while you do this," I said. "You don't get to use her as a shield while you tell me I'm imagining the thing I watched you do with my own eyes, in the same room where I'd just given birth to her. I have spent 31 years deciding that the way you talk to me is something I deserve, or something I'm misunderstanding, or something I should just be grateful you're present enough to do it all. I'm done. I'm not interpreting you generously anymore. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest, for maybe the first time in this family. And I didn't know I had this in me until right now, so don't act like you recognize what's happening, because I don't think I do either." The room went quiet. Tom hadn't moved from the doorway. Lily had started to fuss softly against my shoulder, picking up on something in the air the way babies do. My mother stood, smoothing her blouse with both hands, a gesture I recognized from 100 exits over the years, the recomposing, the retreat that always looked, from the outside, like dignity. "When you're ready to talk like an adult instead of accusing me of things in front of my granddaughter, you know where to find me." She left without raising her voice once. That, I would understand much later, was its own kind of weapon, the steadiness that made my anger look, in the moment, like the unreasonable thing in the room. After the door closed, I stood there holding Lily, shaking slightly, Tom's hand finally landing on my back. "You okay?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "I said things I didn't plan to say. Good things. Maybe. I don't know yet what they cost." I would understand, days later, that the anger I felt in that room hadn't come from nowhere. It had been collecting for 31 years. In every moment, I'd swallowed something instead of naming it. It frightened me a little, how much was still in there. Not because I regretted it. Because I hadn't known, until I heard my own voice, how much I had actually been carrying. She called 9 days later. I almost didn't answer. I'd let 3 calls go to voicemail already that week, a small, deliberate exercise in no longer being available on demand, but something made me pick up the 4th time. Hannah. Her voice was different. Thinner. Less rehearsed. I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. I sat down at my kitchen table, Lily asleep in the next room, and said nothing, which I'd learned, finally, could be its own kind of answer. She finally spoke. This is what she told me. I said it. I know I said it, and I knew it the second it left my mouth, and I spent 3 months telling myself you hadn't really heard it, because that was easier than sitting with what it meant that I'd said it at all. I was 40 pounds heavier than I wanted to be with you when I was pregnant, and your father was already gone in every way that mattered, even though he didn't physically leave for another 2 years, and I remember standing in a kitchen that wasn't even ours yet, doing math about money we didn't have, and somewhere in that math you became a complication before you became a person to me. I didn't choose that. I want you to understand I didn't choose to feel that. But I let it stay. That's the part one have to own, not the feeling, but the years I spent not unlearning it. With Daniel it was different because by the time he came along I'd already decided who I was going to be: competent, in control, a woman who handled things. He got that version of me. You got the version that was still failing at it, still resentful underneath the smiling, and I took that resentment out in small ways I told myself didn't count because I never raised my voice, never hit you. Never did the things I decided counted as real harm. I told myself that as long as I showed up, as long as I was present at every recital and every graduation, the rest didn't matter. I built an entire self-image on showing up. I never once asked myself how I showed up. In the hospital, I looked at you holding her, and for 1 second I saw myself again, in that old kitchen, doing that same math. And instead of feeling joy, I felt afraid you'd resent her the way some part of me had resented you. Afraid I'd somehow pass something down without meaning to. And instead of saying any of that, instead of being honest about my own fear, I turned it into a joke about her, because a joke felt safer than admitting what I actually felt standing there. That's not an excuse. I know it's not an excuse. It's just the truest explanation I have. I don't know how to undo 31 years in one phone call. I don't think I can. But I needed you to hear me say it plainly, without turning it around on you the way I did in your living room, because watching myself do that, watching you stand there asking me to just account for the one thing, and watching myself dodge it instead. That's when I finally saw the pattern you'd apparently been watching your entire life. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Lily's monitor crackled faintly from the other room. Thank you for saying that, I said finally. I mean that. But it doesn't undo what I'm going to do next. Which is, I need time. Real time, not a Sunday visit kind of time. I need to figure out what I want our relationship to look like, if I want one at all, without you in the room making that decision easier for yourself. She didn't argue. That, more than anything she'd said, told me something had actually shifted. The months that followed were quieter than I expected grief to be. I'd imagined, if this day ever came, something more dramatic, slammed doors, dramatic declarations. Instead it looked like ordinary Tuesdays. Like turning down a Sunday invitation and feeling, instead of guilt, a small, unfamiliar relief settle into my shoulders. I understood something that fall that I don't think I could have understood any earlier. I had spent my whole life mistaking my mother's need for control for love, because love was the only word I'd been given for the attention she paid me. But attention isn't the same as love, and I'd spent 31 years conflating the two because the alternative, naming what I'd actually been given, felt like more loss than I could survive. It turned out I could survive it. I just hadn't been given the chance to find that out before. Mara and I talked, eventually, about the 4 minutes it took her to respond to that first text, not as an accusation, but as something we both needed to understand. She told me she'd spent those 4 minutes deciding whether being my friend meant protecting me from a hard truth or handing it to me honestly. I want you to know I'll choose honestly next time, she said, and I believed her because she already had. I spoke to Daniel more in those months than I had in the previous 5 years combined. We didn't become close, exactly. That kind of repair takes longer than one hard summer, but we understood each other differently now. Two people who'd been cast in different roles in the same house and had spent years resenting each other for performances neither of us had chosen. Diane and I exchanged a handful of careful messages over the following year. Not nothing. Not yet what either of us might have once called a relationship. She came to one of Lily's birthday parties, stood near the edge of the yard, didn't try to hold her the whole time unless Lily reached for her first. I watched her do that, wait to be invited instead of assuming, and felt something complicated and unresolved settle into something I could at least live alongside. I still have the yellow blanket. It's folded in Lily's closet now, not the bassinet, not erased, just moved somewhere it doesn't have to mean what it used to mean every time I looked at it. Some nights, watching Lily sleep, I think about the sentence that started all of this. A mistake we'll have to make the best of. I don't think about it the way I used to, as a wound I had to manage quietly. I think about it now as the moment I finally stopped managing my mother's feelings and started attending to my own. I wasn't a mistake. Neither is she. We were just, for a long time, two people standing in the same room, mistaking control for love and silence for peace. I'm not silent anymore. That's the only ending I needed. The cruelest thing Diane ever did to Hannah wasn't the sentence in the hospital room. It was teaching her, years before that pointing out cruelty was itself a kind of betrayal. That's the real architecture this story exposes. Control doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like showing up. Sometimes it looks like a woman who never missed a recital and used that attendance as proof she never needed to examine anything else about how she loved. What makes Diane more than a simple villain is the confession itself, not because it excuses her, but because it reveals how ordinary the mechanics of harm usually are. She didn't set out to make Hannah feel like a burden. She built that feeling slowly, out of her own unexamined fear, her own unfinished grief about a marriage that failed her, and then she protected that feeling for 31 years by never once looking at it directly. Self-deception, in this story, isn't a single dramatic lie. It's a maintenance project, something Diane had to keep reinforcing, visit after visit, joke after joke, to avoid the much harder work of asking what kind of mother she'd actually chosen to be. Hannah's growth doesn't come from the confrontation itself, it comes from what she does after it. Plenty of people manage one good, angry, honest scene and then slide back into old patterns the following Sunday. What makes this an awakening rather than a single outburst is the months of quiet that follow, the declined invitations, the boundary held even after Diane offered something that looked, finally, like real accountability. Hannah had to learn that an apology, even a true one, doesn't obligate you to immediately hand back what it took years to protect. There's something worth sitting within Mara's 4 minutes of silence, too. Loyalty and complicity can look identical from the outside, and the story doesn't let Mara off easily for that. It makes her name it herself. Sometimes the people who love us most participate in our blind spots simply by hoping, the same way we do, that a hard thing might just quietly stop being true if no one says it out loud. By the end, Hannah hasn't punished her mother, and she hasn't fully forgiven her either. She's done something harder than either. She's stopped needing the relationship to be resolved in order to feel whole. I keep thinking about how long Hannah carried that sentence before she let herself believe it had really been said. Maybe that's the part that stays with me most, not the cruelty itself, but how much we're capable of editing, softening, explaining away, just to avoid losing someone we've already lost in every way that mattered. I think a lot of us know a version of that 4-minute silence, the moment we decide whether telling the truth is worth what it might cost the people we love. There's no clean answer for that. But maybe the question isn't whether the truth is worth it. Maybe it's how long you're willing to carry the alternative. If there's one thing I hope you take from Hannah's story, it's this: needing time to heal isn't the same as failing to forgive. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself, and eventually for the people who hurt you, is simply to stop performing peace you haven't actually found yet.